I'm making a few videos about Casanova, that is Giacomo Casanova, the famous and great adventurer and lover, because I noticed there weren't really any good videos of Casanova on YouTube, and I think he really deserves to have discussions about him. He's a great writer. He's extremely underrepresented and neglected. He has a reputation. I mean, the word to be a Casanova means to be some kind of lecherous seducer or lover, and of course that does play a big part in the books and in his life, at least in his own description of his life. But it's only a narrow part of the spectrum that makes him up as a man and that makes up his stories, which are fantastically well written and extremely exciting and extremely funny and interesting. He was primarily an adventurer, which means somebody who travelled around Europe at the time, surviving only on their wits and with whatever resources they could muster, and he was using his wits throughout his life to get himself in and out of extraordinary scrapes, and surviving as he did, he made and lost huge fortunes. He had many hundreds of interesting, fascinating, hilarious, preposterous seductions, some failures, and he travelled across Europe. He travelled for London, Madrid, obviously a lot in Italy, mostly in France, Switzerland, Holland, Poland, the Baltic states, and St. Petersburg, where he meets Catherine the Great. He also meets Frederick of Prussia, King Frederick, and he also spends a lot of time in Paris, in the court of the king, and he writes a lot about politics. In fact, you can discern through the 12 volumes distinct phases. In the early phase, he is almost a pure adventurer and lover. There's a middle phase in his kind of 20s where he is more interested in money and making money, and in that period he is in Amsterdam and also in Paris, and it's in Paris where he makes really his biggest fortune, and the story of that is hilarious in how he does it. I'd love to talk about it in a moment. I'll just give an outline first. Into his 30s and 40s he gets more interested in politics, and he circulates in political, military spheres, aristocratic spheres, and it's wonderful how he is able to recall in conversations all these details of other aristocrats and political military figures that he knows, that really he becomes of value to all the people that he meets. And then later in life he dedicates himself more to literature and writing and translation and what we might call academia now, although he is on his own, and he dies alone and very unhappy, I think, is the story. But his writing of his own life doesn't catch up with him. He doesn't catch up with himself in his writing. And in fact, as you get to the later volumes, he reflects more and more on how he is writing as an old man about what he was like as a young man. And it's very moving, actually. So moving on to some of his most famous exploits, just as to sum them up, probably his most famous act or adventure is he was imprisoned for probably unfair reasons from his home city of Venice, home republic. Of course, it was its own republic or state at the time. He no doubt got himself into a really sticky situation, probably to do with gambling and debts or cheating, and he was imprisoned in an absolutely impenetrable prison called the Leads, with a lead roof, in the Doge's Palace in Venice. You can see it if you go to Venice. You see the Bridge of Sighs over the canal where the prisoners were taken. He was imprisoned under the leads, as in the eaves, in the loft space, and he is or was one of the only, or possibly the only, person to escape from the leads. His own telling of the story of being imprisoned, being in the prison. He was there for at least a year, I think, and then the form of his escape is gripping and unbelievable, incredible story. And it's even richer because on his escape, as he flees across the countryside, he actually stays in the house of the head jailer while the jailer is out looking for him, pretending to be somebody else, staying with his wife and daughter. I don't think there's any seduction there, but it's incredible. I mean, it's kind of Catch Me If You Can escape. A very famous love escapade that he has is the one where he is in love with a girl who's taken to a nunnery on an island in the lagoon of Venice. This is also as a young man. These two stories are both as a young man. And while he goes visiting this nun, he falls in love with another nun who is the protector of the younger nun. So he visits now the older nun, who is probably his age, as in mid-20s, and becomes her lover in these visits to the monastery, which in itself, the logistics of this are interesting, hilarious, exciting, brilliantly described. He's such a subtle writer, so nothing is described in a crude way. Everything is described with wonderful nuance. It turns out that this the nun who is his lover and his really one of the loves of his life. He says at one point something like, "There were 5 women I really loved in my life that I could have stayed with." In fact, when he says that, I'll just digress. He says, there are 5 women or 7 women I really loved and I could have stayed with. And he says, if I had stayed with them, I know I would have been a happier person for the rest of my life, because they had everything to make me happy, and I could give them everything and had all my love. But he says, I was not able to stop moving, and I was not able to do that, and I have had many more adventures, but I have ended lonely and sad. It's really tragic in a way, and it is sad, and the whole thing is a wonderful lesson on so many levels. But going back to the story of the nun, M.M. she was only called, he doesn't give her name. It turns out she's also the lover of the French ambassador to Venice, and is leaving every week or so by boat, obviously, from this island to go to the casino, which means the palazzo of the French ambassador in Venice. And in fact, she ropes Casanova in to perform with her in front of the ambassador, who's hidden behind a wall. It's brilliant. It's portrayed in the Fellini film quite dramaturgically. So another great moment is his first fortune, you might say, when he's in Paris. He is completely faking everything he says and winging it, and he actually says to somebody something like, I have a wonderful idea which will make whoever does it with me and also the king a huge amount of money. He doesn't actually have an idea, he's just winging it. And after a while, somebody comes up to him and says, I heard you also have the idea of doing a lottery. And he says, yes, I do. And then because of his genius, he manages to come up with the mathematics on the spot in his own telling of it. And they run this lottery. He is involved with the foundation of the French lottery. He makes enormous figures, which he spends all of over the next few years, and he has to make it again and again, and he often has no money. He loses in England. He doesn't do very well in London. He loses almost all of his money. In Madrid, he's imprisoned and nearly dies, also poor. So those are some of his most notable. I mean, there are so many. Maybe in some of the other videos I could talk more specifically about some of the things that actually he does. But overall, what's striking about his writing is that it's full of philosophy and theology, but he makes fun of theology. But philosophy and literary allusions. He loves Ariosto, he loves Dante, and many, many other writers. Homer, I think, probably is the most quoted of the person he would refer to as the poet, and Virgil, of course. There is a passage where he meets Voltaire, and he and Voltaire have an argument, and they have a kind of poetry off, where they compete to do the best pentameter, or whichever verse Ariosto was writing in. Where he declares himself the winner. And in terms of whether or not you believe these stories that he has, they have astonishing levels of secondary sources confirming what he says. He signed his name into the hostels where he stayed as he moved around Europe, where he really literally went everywhere. He signed himself in. He's recorded as being present in all kinds of meetings, in all kinds of situations. The histories that he describes when he's talking about the politics of a location. He talks great depth about Russian and Polish politics, because that's where he is at the beginning of his kind of political phase, and of course French and Italian. They're absolutely accurate, as can be recorded by historians, and the Tusk translation has fantastic footnotes describing these, and anyone who's a bit academic will love the footnotes. I don't remember if I showed this already. The translation is in 6 of these books, which is 12 volumes. So each book is 2 volumes. Can we get this here? How can I do that? There, here we are. No, here we aren't. Volumes 1 and 2. Too much light. Volumes 1 and 2, so that's 2 volumes. Casanova, New House. All right, Histoire de ma vie, History of My Life. I thoroughly recommend reading it. It's extremely funny. It's inspirational in the sense that he has absolutely no fear. He's extremely intelligent, and just being in the presence of someone with that level of brilliance and that speed of wit, that philosophical depth, the literary insights that he has, and on top of all of that, there's this madcap adventure quality, and of course it's also quite sexy at many moments. I briefly will say that it almost certainly doesn't really survive Me Too. It's quite, I don't know, maybe it's too early to say about that really. Of course he's an 18th century figure. He dies before the end of the 18th century. He's born in the 1720s, so the prime of his life is in the mid 18th century. And I, because of Casanova, really find it's a wonderful century where huge social change was possible, and people were able to make huge fortunes. People could be able to come out of poverty and reach great heights, and the rather small number of people that are there in these towns, in the coffee houses, in the courts, who are important, meant that you really could make a network of incredible value just through your own talents. And that is actually what Casanova does. And I think it's an inspirational life. It's not a life that one can follow anymore, really, without causing a lot of problems. In those times, maybe it's possible if you're extremely, extremely wealthy. He was able to leave the women that he was with almost always better off than when he found them. That's in his own telling, but it's actually, the materiality of it is quite visible, because he tends to, through him, they meet people of much higher rank than he is, or much richer than he is. He tends to marry people off. Either he marries them off to much richer and more higher status people than him, or he is kind of sleeping with much poorer people who are maybe engaged, who can't get married, or who are somehow trapped in some way, who he frees or releases, or pays for some debt, or organizes a wedding, or organizes permission for a wedding, or all these different things. And he's continuously busy and active, trying to do good for people, and also up to his own schemes. A lot of late night gambling, late night dancing. He certainly styles himself as a great dancer, a great gambler, which probably means a cheat, a drinker, and a wit. And what he doesn't describe much of is how much writing he must be doing all the time, writing letters. I mean, I think he spent hours, it seems that he spent hours a day writing letters. The one thing he always asks for when he arrives in an inn is a desk and paper, and a chair and ink. He carries around these great chests full of his jewels and his guns. He often has guns on him and has to protect himself. And there are some incredible scenes in Poland. There's a duel in Poland, which is fantastically well written. And his trip to Turkey is also terrific. That's as a very young man. He decides to join the military, and he does that by having a uniform of his own invention tailored for him. He has a kind of, I think it's a white uniform with a gold sash or something, totally extravagant. And he gets this uniform tailored, and then kind of goes up to the captain and said, he describes himself as a attaché or something. And he gets taken on board, and he ends up as the assistant. He tries to get at work he ends up as some kind of attaché or assistant to a local pasha. And he said he spends time in Cyprus. I'm sure he makes it to the Ottoman Empire proper, and there are some extremely fun scenes there as well, and illuminating. And he is extremely open-minded, and open-minded to culture, open-minded to people's thoughts. He loves listening to people's stories and kind of interrogating them about their thoughts. And it's a great read, and you learn a lot from it. And I thoroughly recommend it. And if this is an interesting video, I'd be happy to do more where I maybe go into some more detail. So thank you for watching.